Emmett Caldwell opened his mailbox to find a trustee's notice of sale for his own 210-acre farm, citing a Chapter 7 bankruptcy case filed under his name 3 months earlier, a case he had never filed, never received a summons for, and never once heard about until the letter announcing his land would be auctioned off in 6 weeks to satisfy debts he had never owed. He called his son, Nolan, an assistant United States attorney who prosecuted federal fraud cases for a living, and said 4 words that would define the next several months of both their lives. "Someone filed on me." Stay with Emmett as one forged bankruptcy petition unravels into a scheme reaching directly into Silver Oak Estates HOA President Regina Ashford's private development ambitions, and directly into the one family in the county equipped to bring the full weight of federal law down on her. Emmett Caldwell was 67 years old, a third-generation farmer who had worked the same land his grandfather cleared, land that bordered Silver Oak Estates along its northern fence line. He had no debts of any real consequence. His mortgage had been paid off a decade earlier, and the only credit account in his name was a small equipment loan he paid automatically every month without fail. The bankruptcy petition itself, once Emmett and Nolan finally got a copy from the court, was methodically built to look legitimate. Forged signatures on the petition and schedules, a fabricated list of creditors totaling nearly $400,000 in debts Emmett had never incurred, and a case number assigned through the court's standard electronic filing system using login credentials belonging to a paralegal named Corinne Baptiste, who worked at a small bankruptcy filing mill 2 counties over. Regina Ashford, 53, had been Silver Oak Estates HOA president for 6 years, and had spent the last 2 of them quietly pursuing an expansion deal with a regional developer to add 80 new lots along the community's northern edge, land that happened to sit entirely within Emmett Caldwell's farm boundary. Land Emmett had refused to sell every single time Regina had approached him, most recently with an offer she considered more than generous. Unable to buy the land honestly, Regina turned to a private investigator and self-styled problem solver named Desmond Cray, who had a working relationship with Corinne Baptiste from a previous, similarly quiet arrangement involving a different property dispute 2 years earlier, an arrangement Regina had heard about secondhand and filed away at the time as exactly the kind of resource she might need someday. Desmond provided Corinne with basic identifying information about Emmett pulled from public property records, and Corinne generated the fraudulent bankruptcy filing using a template from a legitimate case, forging Emmett's signature from a scanned copy of a public deed record and fabricating a creditor list using shell entities registered to addresses that, if anyone had bothered to check, didn't correspond to any real businesses at all. Nolan, despite his professional experience, immediately recognized he had a serious conflict of interest. He couldn't personally prosecute a case involving his own father, but that didn't stop him from doing what any competent attorney would do first: pulling the actual court docket, requesting the electronic filing metadata, and identifying within days that the login used to submit the petition traced back to a filing account registered to Corinne Baptiste's employer. Rather than touch the case directly, Nolan drove to the FBI's regional field office in person and formally referred the matter to a financial crimes agent named Priya Chandrasekharan, laying out the filing metadata, the forged signature, and the timeline connecting it to Emmett's ongoing land dispute with Silver Oak Estates, then stepped back entirely, making sure every document showed he had referred, not investigated, the case himself. With the criminal referral moving through proper channels but no guarantee it would resolve before the trustee sale date, Emmett's civil attorney, a sharp local practitioner named Ines Vasquez, filed an emergency motion to stay the sale, arguing the entire bankruptcy case was void from inception due to forgery. A motion the presiding bankruptcy judge granted on a temporary basis pending a fraud hearing, buying the family critical time. Emmett spent those 6 weeks unable to sleep through a full night, walking his fence line before dawn the way he had every morning for 40 years, trying to memorize every acre as though it might already be someone else's. He told Ines during one of their planning calls that he didn't care as much about the money as he did about the idea that his grandfather's name on the original deed might end up meaning nothing at all if the paperwork could simply be overwritten by someone with the right connections. Ines worked through the weekend assembling the emergency filing, cross-referencing the forged signature against 6 different documents Emmett had signed over the years, each comparison making the forgery more obvious once laid side by side. "Whoever did this was good," she told Emmett over the phone late one night. "But they weren't good enough to fool someone who actually knows what your real signature looks like." Agent Chandrasekharan, working the case methodically, identified 2 other fraudulent filings tied to the same login credentials over the previous 18 months, both involving property disputes similar to Emmett's, and when confronted with the pattern, Corinne Baptiste, facing decades of potential federal prison time, agreed to cooperate fully, describing Desmond Cray's involvement and the problem solver reputation that had brought clients to him in the first place. Desmond's financial records, once subpoenaed, showed 2 payments from an account linked to Regina Ashford personally. Not the HOA's official accounts, which would have required board approval and left an obvious paper trail, but her own personal checking account, transferred in amounts just under the threshold that would have triggered automatic bank reporting. Agent Chandrasekharan's team identified the 2 other fraud victims. A widow named Loretta Sims in a neighboring county who had lost a small rental property to a similarly forged bankruptcy filing, and an elderly couple, the Patrones, who had nearly lost their lake house before a sharp-eyed court clerk noticed an irregularity in the filing paperwork and flagged it for review. A red flag that, in Emmett's case, no one had caught in time. Loretta told investigators she had spent over a year believing the loss of her property was simply bad luck. A legal misfortune she assumed she didn't have the money to fight, and had quietly grieved it the way she might have grieved anything else she believed was simply gone for good. When investigators first approached Regina for a voluntary interview, she denied any knowledge of Emmett's bankruptcy filing entirely, insisting she had no idea how something like that would even happen. A claim that collapsed the moment agents produced the bank transfer records tying her personal account directly to Desmond Cray's payments, time-stamped within days of each fraudulent filing across all 3 victim cases. At the emergency fraud hearing, Inés Vasquez presented the forensic filing evidence, and the bankruptcy judge, visibly displeased at having his own court's electronic system used as a weapon, voided the entire fraudulent case, restored Emmett's farm free and clear, and referred the matter for sanctions against every party involved in the filing itself, on top of the ongoing criminal investigation. With the criminal case building toward federal indictment, the U.S. Attorney's Office conducted a formal ethics review of Nolan's involvement, confirming he had scrupulously avoided any direct role in the investigation, no interviews, no evidence handling, no case strategy, and that his early referral and immediate recusal had, if anything, strengthened the case's integrity rather than compromised it. The twist came when the review board, rather than simply clearing Nolan of any conflict, formally approved him, under a documented ethical screen and with his father's case walled off entirely from his other duties, to serve as second chair on the eventual federal prosecution, specifically because his early, correct handling of the conflict made him uniquely trusted to help present the case's technical financial evidence at trial, provided he never personally examined witnesses connected to Emmett's own testimony. At trial, Corinne Baptiste testified in full under her cooperation agreement, walking the jury through exactly how she had generated the forged filings using stolen credentials and a legitimate case template, describing the process in the same flat, procedural tone she might have used to describe any routine part of her job. A tone that made the fraud sound almost more chilling for how mundane it had become to her. Agent Chandrasekharan walked the jury through the financial trail connecting Regina's personal account to Desmond Cray and all 3 fraudulent filings, laying transaction dates beside filing dates on a single timeline that made the pattern impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Nolan, seated at the prosecution table but never once addressing his own father's case directly, watched the jury's faces as the pattern became undeniable, occasionally passing a note to lead counsel about a financial detail in the evidence that only someone with his specific fraud expertise would have caught. The jury convicted Regina Ashford and Desmond Cray on multiple counts of bankruptcy fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy, while Corinne Baptiste received a significantly reduced sentence for her cooperation. The court ordered restitution to all 3 victim families, forfeiture of Regina's personal assets tied to the scheme, and a combined judgment, restitution, forfeiture, and civil damages from a separate suit Emmett and the other victims jointly pursued, totaling $3,600,000, along with Regina's permanent removal from Silver Oak Estates Board and a lifetime bar from serving on any HOA board in the state. At sentencing, the judge specifically noted that the scheme had targeted people the court described as least equipped to fight back quickly: an elderly farmer, a widow, and a retired couple, calling it an aggravating factor that justified the upper end of the federal guidelines. Silver Oak Estates elected an entirely new board under court-recommended interim oversight, formally abandoned the Northern Expansion Project, and adopted new financial transparency rules requiring any board member's personal financial dealings with outside contractors to be disclosed. The widow and the elderly couple both received their restitution, with the widow telling a local reporter that she had assumed, for over a year, that the loss of her rental property had simply been a legal mistake she didn't have the resources to fight. Months later, Emmett stood at his fence line watching the sun set over the same northern acres Regina had once tried to take. Nolan beside him, home for the weekend, tie loosened, looking more like a son than a prosecutor for the first time in months. Emmett told him, half joking, that he supposed most fathers didn't get to say their son literally helped save the family farm from federal court. Nolan said the case had taught him something he planned to carry into every fraud case after this one, that the people who forge a signature almost always assume no one will ever look closely enough to notice, and that the whole system, in the end, depends on someone deciding to look anyway. If you've ever had someone try to weaponize against you, leave a comment below. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it ended. And if you enjoyed the story, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.